Welcome to another compelling episode on the No Gray Areas podcast. Today we have on special guest Ashley Yablon to discuss his pivotal decision as a whistleblower at a major telecom company. Yablon's bravery then led to a choice that would foreseeably change his life forever. Let's get started. Ashley Yablon, welcome so much to the No Gray Areas podcast. I read your book recently, and it is a crazy story. Let me just intro people with this one excerpt from the book, and then I'm going to let you run with it. You say in there, you said, in every story there is a defining moment, a precise instant in time when the game changes for good. The whole story from that point forward can be divided into a before and after scenario, things that happened before the critical event, and things that happened after. I set you up for our audience there. Tell us a little bit about this crazy story.
Yeah, so I was the general counsel, the in-house lawyer for the third largest telecom company called ZTE, which is a Chinese telecom. And I happened to start there right when they were under a House investigation, where our U.S. government was concerned that ZTE, as well as my former employer, Huawei, were a threat to U.S. national security. And what I stumbled upon, and I believe that's the part in the book, was Reuters had gotten its hands on a copy of a contract between ZTE and the country of Iran. And the contract was for hundreds of millions of dollars of spying technology. Also, Reuters got its hands on an over 900-page packing list. And the packing list detailed all the spying technology as well as all of the U.S. component parts that made up that that went into the spying technology, which is against U.S. law. You can't re-export embargoed or to the embargoed countries, and that's what ZTE had done, and that's what I uncovered was ZTE's scheme, an elaborate scheme they had created to sell billions of dollars of spying technology. So our government was correct in the sense that they were a threat to U.S. national security.
Yeah. Well, now let me jump kind of to the end of the story, the end of the book, to try to get our audience to understand how big of a deal this was for you, or how big of a deal it ended up for you. Because, I mean, this podcast is all about the power and complexity of human choice, that we make our choices and eventually our choices make us. So your story fits perfectly. So eventually, I'm jumping to the end of the story. Eventually, this company is fined $2.5 billion, correct?
Correct.
Now, for our audience, I did a little bit of math this morning because I can't wrap my mind around that number. That's just too big. So like millions, I can kind of wrap my mind around. If we went back 2.5 million seconds, it would take us back about 29 days. So about a month, 2.5 million seconds. If we go back 2.5 billion seconds, we're going back almost 80 years.
Oh, wow.
So when we talk about like millions and billions, that's a massive difference. They were fined $2.5 billion. So when you talk about international espionage, life's on the line, yours being one of them, the main one on the line, that much money involved, people will do some pretty radical things, right?
They'll do crazy things. You know, what I like to always tell, I just gave a speech a couple of days ago to a few hundred people, and I always say, and I think I mentioned in the book, I spilled the $1 billion beans.
Yeah.
I went to the F.B.I. and told them the elaborate scheme. And, you know, like I said, ZTE was making hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars selling to all these countries. So, and spying technology, which was a threat to our lives. So yes, people will do crazy things. They did all kinds of things, which I'm sure we'll talk about here as we move on.
So when you first start learning of this issue, and this was, again, for the people who are going to end up reading your book, which I highly recommend, they'll discover that this was kind of your dream job. This is what you had been working for, to be general counsel for a large organization like this.
Right.
And you're not working there very long before you start uncovering some things going, uh-oh, right? How long was that?
Less than a month. It was less than a month when we had what I call the Thanksgiving Day meeting. And you have to remember, everyone there is a Chinese national on a visa, and the only executive who's an American citizen is myself. So yeah, within 1 month, I knew I was in grave danger when it was uncovered that we were under House investigation, and they pointed to me. This should have been a red flag. the first of many, and said, "You, Ashley, will be the one who stands up on C-SPAN in front of Congress and says we're doing nothing wrong." So that should have been a big red flag.
That's so crazy. So you're there, the dream job. This company is bringing in hundreds of millions of dollars, and you're there less than a month or about a month, and they're telling you you're going to be on C-SPAN telling the world that we're innocent of whatever they're.
Correct.
Yeah, yeah. So, what was your What was your conversation that night when you go home with your wife? Because your wife's an attorney as well. Is that correct?
Correct. Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, I always tell people there are two main themes in my book, and it's the theme of what your podcast about, and that is number one, be careful what you wish for because you just might get it. And so this is everything I'd wanted. And I talk about red flags and obviously talk to her about it, but I saw them, but I didn't see them because I didn't want to see it, right? It was everything that I had dreamt of, everything I'd worked for. So I didn't see the red flags as they were flying right in front of my face. So the conversation was basically me saying it's problematic, she pointing it out, and she was always the voice of reason while I was skeptical, but obviously wanted to keep on because this is everything I had worked for.
Yeah, I think our audience can probably all connect with what you're saying. I certainly can, because I think we've all been in a situation, probably not where $2.5 billion in our life is at stake, but I think we've all been in a situation where we ignored some red flags.
Right.
And that's what loved about your book, Ashley. I've never been in a situation quite like that, but there were so many principles and ideas and thoughts that came out of the book where I'm going, I've been in that situation. So I love the fact that you're saying you were kind of avoiding or ignoring these red flags. How long does this go on then before you realize like this is serious? I'm in this no going back moment.
Probably that opening line that you read was the turning point, and that was when we were in Shenzhen, China, where ZTE is based, and I'm reviewing the actual contract, the one that there was a subpoena, and it was made out to me by our Department of Commerce, looking to get a copy of that contract. So I'm reviewing the contract in Shenzhen, China. And I see in plain English a section of this hundreds of millions of dollars of contract that says a section called How We Will Get Around U.S. Export Law. And I nearly fell out of my chair. Couldn't believe it was so brazen and over the top. And then I went and I met with the head of Chinese people there, the CEO and the general counsel, and explained this is problematic. And they kept coming up with more elaborate and over the top schemes of how to get around it. And I think the main turning point, and this is when I knew I was in what I would say a total pickle, was when a Chinese attorney who worked for me, as they were speaking in English and in Mandarin, she turned to me in English and said, "Ashley, they're lying to your face. They're not going to comply with the U.S. government, and they're going to make you the scapegoat." And when she said that, I knew all of it just came to a head, and I rushed back to the U.S. and figured out what my next steps were.
Now, what meeting was it? Because in your book, you end up they let you in this room, and you have to review. Is that the time that you're discussing, where they let you in
Right.
this room? They let you. There's hundreds, maybe thousands of pages of documents, and you just have a brief time to look at it. But you just happen to find this part. Is that the part of the book you're talking about?
Correct. I was led into a room with it was something out of a B-rate movie. There was no windows, a totally dark room. I walked in. It was pitch black. The only light was from a laptop. And I said, I need to see the agreement and that 900-page packing list. And they said, you're not going to see that. What you're going to get is 15 minutes to review each one of them. And I said, there's no way I can do that. So those were the rules they gave me. They projected like you said, the contract on the wall, literally on the wall, like a projector. And as they're scrolling
This
through it,
does sound like a B movie. You're
it
right.
really was. And any international contract, and I won't bore you or your audience with legalese, but any international contract is split down the middle, with one half being in English and the other half being in this instance Chinese. And I'm reading through the agreement quickly as I can. And as I was scrolling and scrolling, I said, "Stop, scroll back up." And he scrolled back up, and like I said, there was a section called How We Will Get Around U.S. Export Laws. And it was so brazen because it even had a diagram, a picture of all the shell entities and companies that ZTE had created in order to create this illegal, elaborate scheme. And that's what I saw. And then that same day, that same meeting, a little bit later that afternoon, is when they told me, "Oh, we'll comply." And then that's when the attorney turned to me and said, "They're lying to you. They're speaking in Mandarin. They're going to destroy all the evidence that the government is requesting, and they're going to make you the scapegoat."
Man, so you go back to your hotel room. Not a very nice hotel room again. We won't tip
Right.
the readers off on that one. They can read the book. I
Yeah.
love that. You go back to your crappy little hotel room. What were you thinking?
I was numb. I was actually numb. I called my wife and I told her what was happening. And she said, ironically, "Ashley, you have to get home. Oh, but by the way, they're stopping ZTE employees. It's on the news. They're stopping them at the border at the airport." And I thought, oh my gosh, if they're going to stop anyone, it's going to be me, the attorney for the company, the head attorney. And not only that, if you think about it, I'm also the unicorn, because not only am I the head attorney for a ZTE, but I'm also the other attorney. I was the assistant general counsel for Huawei, which was also under House investigation. These were the two Chinese telecom companies. And like I said, here's the attorney for both. And I was fearful of getting home. So that whole plane ride was a white knuckle ride all the way back to the U.S.
You're like, you don't know what you're going to walk into, right?
I
You
don't
have
know.
no
I don't
idea.
know if I'm going to be able to get through security. I don't know if I'll get through customs. I don't know. That was
Had
the fearful part.
had you had any conversations with the FBI up at this point?
Not to that point.
At
No.
that point, so you hadn't. On the way to the airport while you're still in China, there's someone who is with you that tells you, forget what you saw, or something to
Some,
that.
yeah, I can't say too much about that because that rides a fine line. But I got a look from someone that was very clear that I needed to forget what I knew, and the look told me, get rid of the notes you just took of everything you saw.
That's what it was. Yes, it was the notes you
Right.
had some. Yeah, yeah. So you're flying back to the U.S. You now know this is serious. This is that moment like that I read at the very beginning of this podcast where your life from this moment on is going to be different than your life was before that,
For
right?
sure. For sure.
You know,
It all changed at that moment, and then from there on out.
so I want to keep uncovering and unpacking the story a little bit, but I want to key in on this though for a moment because you did have a choice. You could have
Yeah.
pretended like you could have ignored. You didn't have to be that whistleblower.
Right.
What made you make that choice? And I think again, this is why I love your story, Ashley. You didn't know when you made that you knew it was going to be serious, but I don't think you knew how serious it was going to be, did you?
No, no, I didn't. I never knew. When you read my book, and obviously, Pat, you did, you see the ramifications and the fallout from what happened. And obviously, I had no idea. I knew it was huge, what I was in the middle of, but I didn't know what was going to happen. I think, to your point, I'm an attorney. My wife is an attorney. All my best friends are attorneys. But I ended up hiring 5 different lawyers that I was personally paying to represent me. And I struggled with what to do. My criminal lawyer, again, had to hire a criminal lawyer. And my criminal lawyer said, we need to go to the FBI. And for about 2 weeks, I sought the advice of everyone and I went back and forth. And I won't bore your audience again with legalese, but we've all heard of attorney client privilege.
Yep.
So that's with your client comes to you and tells you they committed an illegal act in the past. You have to keep that confidential as an attorney. The exception to that is when your client comes to you and tells you they're going to further a crime in the future. And that's what
You no
ZTE
longer
was.
have client
No
the
longer.
okay.
No longer. And so that's when you have a duty. You actually have a duty to go report that as an attorney. And I struggled with this because I felt, for the point you brought up earlier, this is my dream job. It's everything I wanted. I didn't want to see these things, but I don't mean to sound corny. I really don't. But this is true. I felt as an American, this is something I had to do. And I saw it as important because if not me, then who? Right?
Yeah.
There's no one
Yeah.
else who's going to, number one. And number two, we're not talking a petty crime. We're talking a crime against our country
Yeah.
and our national security. And so the one instance that happened was my criminal lawyer said to me, I turned to him and I said, I don't see how I can do this. And he said, Ashley, I don't see how you can't. And
Huh.
when he said that, something about that flipped the switch for me. And I knew that I had to go. And so he set up a meeting with the FBI, and I ended up telling them for 2 straight days everything I knew, all the players, all the shell entities, and laid it out for them for 2 straight days.
Wow. What I love is I think on your website it talks about this, and maybe in the forward of the book that it says something about what is easy is not always right.
Right.
And again, this is where our audience, myself, we can resonate with your story. Not in the same situation as you were in by any means, but we've all been in some of those situations where we have to make a choice, and it may not be an easy choice.
Right.
But I think that actually describes what heroes do. Right? We love watching movies or reading books about heroes. And what they do is they usually, in the face of conflict, in the face of something that feels overwhelming, and in the face of making a decision that's going to make their life like yours, from this point on, my life will never be the same. They make the right decision, right?
Right.
So you were in that place. You made that decision. You go to the FBI for 2 days. You're unpacking everything.
Correct.
Where does it go from there?
So I give all that information to the FBI. They take my laptop. They make what they called a preservation copy of it. I'm told to go right back to work. And so I do. My understanding from the FBI was they were to take that what they created a 32 page, it became a 32 page affidavit, and present that to a judge to do what we call, they were going to do a raid, an old school raid on ZTE USA, but they needed the permission of a judge to do it. But that was to be filed under seal, meaning never to see the light of day, not a public record. No one would ever know about it. That was my understanding. So fast forward a couple of months, I'm going to work one morning, and as I'm walking up to the office, my phone rings, my cell phone, and it's a reporter. And he had gotten a copy of that affidavit, and my heart fell to the ground. I couldn't believe it. He said, I'm writing a story about it, and you want to make any comment? And I said, that's confidential. You shouldn't have access to it. He said, well, I do. And I'm writing a story. And I knew, I spoke to my attorneys. We tried to figure out, we couldn't get it stopped. And the bottom line was, my wife and I were sitting at home, sweating to death in the heat of summer and here in Texas, and hitting the refresh button on that laptop. And soon enough, the story comes out. We jump up. My wife says, we got 30 minutes to get out of this house or we're going to get killed.
Hey, from your No Gray Areas team, we just want to say thank you so much for listening. And if you're loving this episode, would you just take a moment and leave us a review, rating on whatever platform you're listening from? If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on the new podcast episodes that drop every other Wednesday. By leaving a review and subscribing, you help others discover our podcast's inspirational messages to effectuate positive change in their lives. Okay, let's jump back into this episode.
Soon enough, the story comes out. We jump up. My wife says, we got 30 minutes to get out of this house or we're going to get killed. We throw bags together and we scramble out.
Yeah.
And we went into hiding. That's where it started.
By the way, I love the way that you did the book, because the book actually starts at that point.
Yeah,
Right?
it does.
Like you guys are sitting there, ducked down in your house,
Yep.
hitting refresh, and then the story, and then you realize the story did go public, and now your life is on the line, and you guys are packing 30 minutes, getting out of there, going and hiding out in some hotel.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so let's just back up really quick. How far into it are you now? Have you been there for 3 months, 6 months, 8 months? Do you remember?
Yeah, let's see. I'd been there. Oh goodness. It was a summer, 8 months, I guess. So,
Okay.
about close to 8 months. Yeah.
So things are unraveling pretty quickly. I mean, within
Real
a month,
quick.
you find out something's going on, and within 8 months, you're sitting down with the FBI putting together a 32-page affidavit.
Yeah, and so when we're in hiding, my phone is blowing up. Every news agency in the world had found my number and was calling me. And I'm calling my attorney, and he basically sets up a meeting with the FBI. And so we go back to the FBI, and he says to him very clearly, in fact, we're sitting there, and my attorney says to me, he says, Ashley, I've been coming to the FBI for 40 years representing clients. And he said, I've never seen the level of heavy hitters that they brought in to meet with you. And I said, well, great. So my attorney explains to him, you've ruined his life. Number one, he's going to lose his dream job. That's a given. Number two, No, he's never going to, his career is over too, because no one's ever going to hire him. And number three, you've put his life at risk. And I'll never forget the head person from the FBI said, if this was the Mexican Zetas, he'd already be dead. If this was the Russian mafia, he'd already be dead. The Chinese, he said, are about third on the list. And I said, is that supposed to make me feel better?
It's not giving you a lot of
And
comfort.
yeah, and so from there, they said, no, we're sorry. And we don't know how it got leaked. And then they said, we'll put you in the witness protection program, you and your wife, if you want. And I said, well, please tell me I have other options. And he said, well, we can do I said, we aren't at our house. We fear it's probably bugged. He said, we can do a sweep of your house. He also gave me what I affectionately called the bat phone, which was a number that I could call at any time, and the FBI would be there in about 3 minutes. And I actually had to use that at one point. But and that was what I was given. And so I had to go home to my wife and make some decisions.
Yeah. Let me just read another excerpt out of the book that goes along with what you're saying that can help our audience understand the serious situation you were in. You wrote, if Donna and I wanted to talk to each other about anything sensitive, we maintained the practice I mentioned before. We'd go into the backyard, turn on the sprinklers, and speak in a whisper. So you guys are so concerned about your house being bugged, people watching you, that I mean, again, this is like a movie. You
Yeah.
guys are going out in the backyard, putting the sprinklers on and whispering to each other to have a conversation.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm smiling now, laughing. It obviously wasn't funny then, but
No.
yeah, this is how it went. And yeah, it was very scary. My wife, it's also detailed in the book, followed by a Chinese gentleman in a car as she walked the dog. We went to go have dinner a good 25 miles from our house. We sit down and two Chinese gentlemen come in, something out of a movie, in black suits, white shirts, black ties, sit directly next to us at a table and throw down their menus and just stare at us.
Yeah.
And that's when I had to use the bat phone. The FBI came, and you can read about it in the book. But, that death threats, we're going to kill you. We're going to, this is coming from ZTE, from ZTE's phones. We're going to kill you. We're going to kill your family, your children, your children's children. And it went on and on and on. I gave all that information to the FBI. And like I always say, the FBI is in the information gathering business, not the information giving business. So I never found out anything what happened with those or what they found when they swept my house.
That's a great line, by the way. And
Mhm.
I suspect you know the truth of that more than most.
Yeah, for sure.
They're not updating you on how things are going
No,
by
they're
any
not.
means.
They're not giving me reports and daily briefings. No.
So this story comes out. You guys are in hiding, but you still have to go back to the building. Tell us about that day.
That is everyone asked me at a speech I gave the other day. Someone asked me, what was the scariest event of all those? And I said, well, there's so many, but the one we're about to talk about is the scariest one. And that was, again, remember, I was paying out of my own pocket 5 lawyers, went through all my savings, sold my wife and I sold everything we owned just to pay these 5 lawyers to represent me. And my employment lawyer said, you need to go back to work. And I said, you've got to be kidding me. And sure enough, we worked it with the FBI. I had plainclothes officers at the building because we had a building, ZTE did. And I remember going up that elevator, and as I walked in, the glass doors, the receptionist, a Chinese lady, saw me, dropped her phone and said, oh my God, it's him.
Wow.
And I walked around the corner, and, like any office, you have all the cubicles. 80% of our office, again, we're Chinese nationals, something out of a movie. As I rounded the corner, all the Chinese nationals stood up in unison, and you could hear a pin drop. It was so silent. As I made my way to my office, I actually had an office with a door at the very back as an executive, and my door was covered in yellow police crime scene tape. And I had to tear that off. Open my door, and I had a 6 foot by 6 foot whiteboard that I used to, describe things. It was erased, and in all caps with 3 exclamation points was the word "die." So that's what I was greeted with as I came to work. My heart was pounding, and all that situation certainly didn't make me feel any better.
Tell us about your security guy.
Yeah, great point. So I had three Chinese lawyers that work for me. And when I came in, I noticed that where their office was, the actual door was taken off the hinges and pulled in front because their office was catty corner to mine. So you could look in, we could look in and see each other's office, and that they were all gone, but the door was taken off of that office, and a large desk was pulled to the front, and a huge Chinese gentleman, one I'd never seen, in a, again, something out of a movie, black suit, white shirt, black tie, was there every day to monitor me. His job was to watch me. He was there before I got there in the morning, and he was there as I left in the afternoon.
He's not
So
answering
I had
phones or typing or anything, right?
he saw me, and he just monitored me. He had his arms folded like this on his desk, and didn't move. He was like the Century Man. I think I mentioned that in the book. But yeah, I had my own security guard to monitor me.
Wow. So where does this go from there then? You're back at work, you're going to work there. They're under investigation. Where does this go?
So what happened was this kept on, and ZTE actually took my laptop from me. They didn't allow me to have a laptop. They didn't allow me to have a phone. But I said, I'm here to work. I have a job to do. And it was like a torture. They were gonna just try to torture me to quit, and I just wouldn't do it. And finally, after about 30 days, my wife says to me, "You realize you're in a hostile work environment." And here I am, an attorney that deals with that on a day-to-day basis for a company. But when it's you don't see it.
Yeah.
And they put me on administrative leave, which sounds great, but I couldn't quit because my employment lawyer said I need to preserve those claims. So I'm sitting at home, maybe getting paid, but remember, I'm still paying all these lawyers to represent me. And I ended up resolving my issues with ZTE, which sounds great. Let me just say this: I made enough to pay back all my lawyers, even more money that I they had given me on credit. But I obviously had sold everything that I owned anyway. And the investigation went on with ZTE until 2017. But for me, for 3 years, no one would ever return my call. I couldn't get a job.
You're handing out resumes and you're not even getting a call back.
I sent out, well, let me just say this. I sent out and applied for over 500 jobs. And not only did I apply for jobs as a general counsel, but even entry level attorney positions, and no one would even return my phone calls.
Yeah.
So for almost 3 years, I just went to go work for my wife and work for her. But the investigation continued on against ZTE to what you alluded to at the beginning. ZTE ended up settling with our government and paying the largest penalty. At the time, it was $1.2 billion, with some caveats of ZTE. If they were bad players, they'd have to pay more. Well, of course they were, and they broke the rules and had to pay another 1.2. So it was, like you said, about $2.5 billion. The largest penalty ever assessed and paid by a company was one assessed against ZTE. I fell through the cracks. I call myself a whistleblower, but the laws at the time didn't allow me to recover anything. I didn't recover a penny. Now the laws would have entitled me to roughly 30% of that 2.5 billion. I'm not good at math, but I think that's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money. Again, if you go back to the 2.5 million seconds versus 2.5 billion seconds, there's a big difference.
Yeah.
So did the laws change since then? Is that what you're
Yeah.
saying? Is so whistleblowers now, there's some incentive or at least something that they're going to get out of this? Because like you again, let me go back to that. When you're in China and you see that document and you're getting these nonverbal cues of you better forget what you saw, like get rid of your notes, and you're deciding on doing the right thing, you had no idea the impact that was going to have on your life, right? So
Yeah.
you alluded to it. Give us a little more insight into how that changed your life.
Yeah, at the time, yeah, to your point, I had no idea I'd end up hiring 5 lawyers, going through every bit of my savings, selling. I ended up like having garage sales, selling everything that we owned just to raise money to pay attorneys, borrowed from family and friends, hired 5 lawyers. And then to your point, didn't realize then that I potentially would have to go into hiding. I'd get death threats. I'd lose my dream job. I'd almost lose my career. And then no one would even call me back.
Yeah.
Here I am, 40 years old, been general counsel of a multi-billion-dollar international company. And now I can't even get a call back for an entry-level position. So, yeah, it takes a toll on you mentally, physically. And that's kind of the tip of the iceberg, really. Yeah.
So where are you at today? Like, you've obviously processed some of this. You've written a book. Am I allowed to talk about maybe the movie?
Yeah.
We can
Sure.
edit that out if I'm not, but
No, we
yeah.
certainly can. To kind of catch you up, I did eventually get a wonderful opportunity to be GC, and I was GC with a company for about 3 years, and then really needed a break. So in 2018, I took time off. I wanted to write my book, which I did, and then I knew I still wanted to practice, but I started my own firm, and I've been very fortunate, I guess, starting my 6th or 7th year of having my own firm and own practice, and knock on wood, we're doing really well, and I'm very happy. And yeah, wrote the book, went out, I speak about it quite a bit. And then to your point, yes, we're in the process of working on the movie. We're just finishing up the script, which
Good.
is excellent. It's really fun, really fun.
Good. Well, huge congratulations on those things for sure. Let me show our audience the book. There's one behind you on your shelf, but
Yeah.
this is the book. I highly recommend it. And you were kind enough to send us a signed copy that a week after we drop this podcast, we're going to give away to one of our audience members. But am I missing anything? Is there anything that you'd like to, before we start wrapping this up, is there anything that you would like to share that maybe we didn't touch on?
I think that's it. You think you've covered you hit the highlights.
For sure. Tell us how we can connect with you, how our audience can get a copy of the book, that you have a website, correct? What is that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. It's Ashley Yablon. So just my full name, ASHLEYYABLON.
Well, again, Ashley, thank you so much for joining us. We want to finish up with this ironic thing we do, the 2 truths and a lie. We've gotten to know you pretty well. But before I jump into that, I just want to say thank you. And man, I just want to honor you for making that difficult decision. Not an easy one, and one that went and really, obviously, as our audience heard, changed your life. But this is why you fit so perfectly with what we talk about, and really the premise of this podcast is human choice. There's a power to it. I mean, I'm a person of faith, and so I believe that we were created with this power of choice, and there's good and bad on that. We make choices, and eventually our choices make us, and your story is certainly with that. So I just want to honor you and thank you for making that difficult choice.
Thank you.
And for being a patriot. Love your shirt, by the way.
Yeah.
But your decision, part of that was based on, international espionage. So thank you.
Oh,
Appreciate
thank you.
that so much.
Thank you so much, Pat. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, 2 truths and a lie. This is a fun part. You're just going to give me 3 statements, and I have to try to identify which one might be a lie.
Okay. First one. I won $10,000 in a scratch off in the Texas lottery. That's 1. 2, I have my private pilot's license. And 3, I was a child model and actor.
Ooh, those are good. Those are good. Okay, I'm going to go with the middle one is being true. I think you went and got your private pilot's license.
I did.
Is that true?
That is true.
Okay, all right. Now I'm down to a 50-50 chance. The reason I guess that being true is because I travel to Texas periodically, and that is a massive state, and I can see why someone would want a private pilot's license just to get around in that state. That was my thinking in that one. I'm going to go with the scratch off one is the lie.
You are correct. Wow, very good. Why'd you figure that?
I got it. I don't know. Literally, that was almost like flipping a coin in my mind. So
That's funny.
Yeah. What was your third one again?
I was a
child acting. So you did a little bit of child acting.
Acting and modeling, yeah, I did as a kid. Did a bit of that. Did some commercials and radio and TV, and then print work, and a lot of stuff for magazines and stuff like that.
Yeah, good. Well, thank you so much, Ashley. Really appreciate you being on the No Gray Areas podcast. And again, thank you for the choices that you've made.
Thank you so much, Pat.
As we conclude this episode, if you want to learn more about his story or check out Ashley's book, visit his website, ashleyyablon.com. As you go into your week, remember from the episode that the right choice isn't always the easy choice. We'll see you next time on No Gray Areas.